Okay, Casey. What is your favorite archetype in a murder mystery?
My favorite archetype in a murder mystery? I would have to say the detective who comes in, just happens to be in the area or is traveling with the same group of people. It's just so funny to me and just comes in and, constantly contradicts everybody else. They're always kind of whimsical and they don't seem to be taking it seriously, but they do end up solving it. I love that, so...
I think it would probably... My favorite would either be the kind of femme fatale that's always there. You know, it's always...
The Miss Scarlet.
Yes, of all the gin joints and all the places, she walks into mine.
Yeah, sure.
Or the loose party hard bachelor is always one of my favorites because he's always
the Jay Gatsby type.
Yes, the Jay Gatsby type. It's always like, what is it? I too would like to sit in the middle of the couch with my arms spread along the back and my arms crossed and be of indeterminate gender and sexual orientation.
Any Oscar Wilde character.
Yes, those are always my favorite because they're always such little jerks. It's so funny.
It's kind of like reality television.
Yeah, like I would not like them as human beings, but I like them as characters.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Welcome to This Is Lit, a podcast where we drink and talk about our favorite books. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey.
So raise a glass and let's get started.
All right, Liz, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking a chai tea latte from a place that has a similar name to a popular Marvel ship.
It rhymes with Farbucks.
Yes.
I'm drinking Canyon Road White Zin 2018, and it's a twist
top.
Someday Liz will be drinking with me.
Y'all,
again.
I am so close to having these babies I can taste the wine.
She's just
I
watching
swear.
me pour
I am.
this
I'm
wine
watching
with,
her
a thirsty
pour.
look on her face. Poor thing.
I'm gonna go full hedonist after these babies come out.
All right. Today we are talking about the Hercule Poirot Christmas murder mystery, which is called several different things, I believe.
It was originally called A Murder for Christmas, I believe.
A Murder for Christmas, and then there's...
a Holiday Murder.
A Holiday Murder.
Or a Holiday for Murder, my mistake.
A Holiday for Murder. Okay. Yeah, but when we found it was just called Hercule Poirot's Christmas.
Yes.
So it's almost like the Christmas special of Agatha Christie's character, Hercule Poirot.
Yes.
Have you read any other Poirot novels?
Yes, I have. I've read several. I think I read the first 4 in the series, and of course I've read Murder on the Orient Express, which we need to read.
I think Murder on the Orient Express was maybe the first true whodunit that I ever really did.
Yeah.
You know? Or ever really read.
The Mysterious Affair at Styles.
Yeah, yeah. And Hercule Poirot is the kind of character, in some of the novels, he is actually, hired to solve a crime. But more often than not, he's just kind of there.
Yeah.
Or nearby when it happens.
It's like Murder, She Wrote. It's like he just keeps stumbling into all these murder situations.
Yeah. So in this particular case, we're dealing with a family... the
Lee family.
The Lee family. And... I had a whole list of characters that we had to pull up because there's
there's
so many. It's a short novel. It's less than 200 pages.
Yes.
But there are a ridiculous number of characters in it.
The way to keep track of it is the kind of the patriarch of the family is Simeon Lee, and he has 4 sons: George, Alfred, Harry, and David.
Yes.
All 4 sons, except for Harry, right?
Harry's not married.
He's
a bachelor.
Have wives.
So Lydia is Alfred's wife. Magdalene is George's wife.
Yeah.
Hilda is David's wife. And then there's Pilar.
Pilar, who is...
Simeon's granddaughter.
Yeah, Simeon's granddaughter by his only daughter of the family.
And we'll get to the rest of the characters later.
Yes.
Because how the book starts out actually is with Pilar on a train on her way to go and see her grandfather for Christmas.
Yes. Simeon Lee sent out a letter to all of his children and said, "Look, I just want all of us to be together for Christmas." And so the book starts off with each one of the Lee children discussing whether or not this is a good idea for everybody to go home for Christmas, except for Alfred and Lydia, who live with Simeon Lee and take care of him.
In his manor.
Yeah.
So Pilar is the first character we meet. She is half Spanish. She is the granddaughter of Simeon Lee.
Yes.
And she's also an orphan. Her mother, Jennifer, had been his only daughter.
Yes.
And she had married a Spaniard and basically kind of left the family.
Yes.
And then she had died, and the father had died under some mysterious circumstances about a year previous to the story. And so Pilar was an orphan living in Spain in the middle of a war. And so she had traveled to...
Because this was 1934, 38?
38, I think.
Something like that.
So in the middle of the war, she is traveling to the English countryside to meet her grandfather for the first time.
Yes.
And on the train, she meets a man named Stephen Farr.
Yes.
She meets a man named Stephen Farr, who is a South African businessman.
Yes.
Who is traveling as well and has noticed her on the train because she is very beautiful.
Yes.
Agatha Christie generally writes in third-person omniscient, which means that at some point or other we hear the internal like monologue of any given character at any given time. So like it starts with Pilar and then it jumps over to Stephen, who has noticed her, and jumps kind of back and forth between them. And then he leaves her train car to go sit back in his car and notices the address on her suitcase, and that is where we leave those two characters.
Yes. And then we start hopping to all of the sons and their wives about going,
David, it does start with Alfred and Lydia, who live with
Alfred and Lydia.
Simeon, because they are discussing the guests they're going to be having.
Yes, of course.
Lydia is a very stern sort of woman.
She is.
She's very strong and very opinionated, but she's also very classy in English, so she never says any of the rude things that she thinks. Essentially, yeah. She's very traditionally British. In that she is very cultured and doesn't say anything rude, even if she's thinking it. But she's also very strong-willed.
Yes.
Unlike her husband's mother had been.
Exactly.
Her husband's mother, Simeon's late wife, is referred to several times throughout the novel, and is said that she was very weak-willed. That she just basically bent to all of Simeon's whims, did not ever call him out on being a horrible cheat, etc., etc. And he hated her for it. So
sounds like a great marriage.
Lydia is trying, as the lady of the house, Lydia is trying to figure out who all's coming, when they're going to get there. Yeah.
Yes.
She expects George and his wife because they always come.
And George is in Parliament.
Yeah, George is an MP in Parliament.
And
his wife Magdalene is 25 years younger than him.
Yes, and beautiful.
And very beautiful, very silly.
And George is a skinflint.
Yeah, he's a Scrooge. He doesn't like to share money. He's not very generous.
And Magdalene is, she wants to keep up with
pretty
the fashions,
dresses,
keep up with appearances, so she spends.
Yes. So they're talking about these people coming, and then I believe Alfred tells Lydia that David is coming.
Yes, David is coming.
And Lydia responds badly to this because David left the house under bad conditions.
Yes, David was cast out of his house for wanting to pursue art.
Partially
he's a gentle
that.
soul.
David, the relationship David has with Simeon is very complicated because David was much closer to his mother. And this is actually the next family that we jump to.
Yes.
Is David and Hilda, because David is not going. He's planning on staying home. He doesn't want anything to do with his father or the family. And Hilda actually talks him into going, saying, you need to forgive your father and move on from the past.
Hilda is a...
very countryside woman.
Yes, a very countryside woman. She wants to believe the best in everybody.
She's very practical, very stout.
And so she believes in Simeon's letter that says he wants to reconcile, he wants his family around him for Christmas. She's like, he's an old man now, he's an invalid. He probably just wants,
a good turn, be on good terms, yeah.
And so she knows she can convince David to do it, but she doesn't want to force him to do it because she knows there's a lot of bad blood there, there's a lot of emotional trauma there, and she doesn't want to, cause any more harm to her husband than necessary, but...
So she's trying to get him to bury the hatchet, so to speak, because David was the one that was closest with his mother, so he was the only one who ever heard her complaints about how his father was mean to her, how he was cheating on her. It's actually said that Mrs. Lee died of a broken heart.
Yes.
And that's when David left the house. First off, he was not interested in joining the family business or the military like his father expected him to. And then his father had treated his mother so poorly, and she died. And so he basically left and never came back.
Which the family business was Simeon Lee went to South Africa and struck it rich with a diamond mine, and came back and
he was a
invested
millionaire
wisely.
twice over, they said.
Yes, millionaire twice over. He came back, he invested wisely, and he made a pretty sum of money.
So the next ones we meet are George and Magdalene.
Yes.
And really all we get out of that scene, because it's already a foregone conclusion that they're coming, is more of their characterization, which is that he is a penny pincher.
Yes.
And kind of a louse. And
George is pretty much going to stay in the will.
Yeah. George, that's really why he's there, is because he thinks, and he even says at some point that the old man's going to die sooner or later.
Yeah.
And then we'll have that money. But then he also chastises his wife for the spending habits she's had lately. And she kind of, I didn't realize, Magdalene is pretty and young, and she's maybe not the smartest person in the book, but she definitely knows that she's pretty and young and can use that to look dumber than she is.
Use it to her advantage.
So that people will underestimate her, and you kind of see that in that scene. And then we do not have a scene with Harry, do we?
No, we don't. Which I understand, Magdalene, because we're it's Christmas time, budgets are stretched, but y'all, I need new shoes because my feet hurt.
Fair enough. So, then people start arriving.
Yes.
At the house. And at the house, there are some other people that we need to mention.
There's the
There's the staff. So, there are several staff members, but the three that are most important and are mentioned the most often are Horbury, who is kind of a valet, kind of a nurse. He is, he's Simeon's nurse.
Yeah, since Simeon Lee...
And personal assistant.
Since Simeon Lee is a bit of how they say is an invalid, which is probably not the proper term anymore.
He's a shut-in.
Yeah,
And he's old and he's ill.
Yeah, and he has trouble getting around. So Horbury is kind of like his on-call nurse, his stay-at-home caretaker.
He's there every day, and then he leaves in the evenings.
Yes.
Then Tressilian is the butler who has been there for 40 years.
Oh, we forgot about the butler.
Yeah, Tressilian is the butler.
There's always a butler.
Yeah, there's always a butler in these kind of stories. And he's been there 40 years. He's served the Lee family this whole time. Very, very loyal.
Yes.
Will lie for them. And that's established very early on that Tressilian will lie.
Yeah, he's been there on something like 40 years.
And then there's Walter the footman.
Yes.
Which we don't know much about Walter, except for that he's
been there about a year.
He's been there about a year, and he's a little bit of a klutz. So this is the scene we've set for ourselves here. It's a very traditional murder mystery. It's there's a big old house in the countryside, and there's a butler, there's a valet, there's a bunch of family that have infighting and petty squabbles. It's kind of setting the scene. This is there's
money.
There's very traditional murder mystery. And another thing we failed to mention is Agatha Christie actually wrote this book for her brother-in-law.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, in my copy, I got mine off of Project Gutenberg. Shout out to Project Gutenberg for all of their free books whenever they're past their copyright. I did that when we read And Then There Were None as well. But there was a foreword in the book, and it was to her brother-in-law. And the reason she wrote this book is because her brother-in-law had complained that as the years had gone on and as she wrote more and more books, they got more tame and the murders got less violent. And
so that's why there was emphasis on the blood.
So she chose to write this more violent and dramatic murder, specifically because specifically because her brother-in-law had commented on it, which I thought was hilarious.
You don't mess with Agatha Christie, man.
You want a bloody murder mystery? I'll give you a bloody murder mystery. So all the family arrives.
And it's at Christmas. Which, to be fair, who amongst us has not ever wanted to commit murder at a family holiday? I've strongly considered it.
That should have been our cold open.
Yeah.
So, the family start arriving, and the tensions already start rising, and things get even more tense when Tressilian goes to answer the door, and Harry Lee is standing at the door.
Harry, the quote-unquote prodigal son.
Yeah, they call Harry the prodigal son throughout the novel. Harry calls himself this even, because Harry basically ran away from home. He did not want a part in, what his father had planned for him.
But he is his father's favorite.
Well, he's the most like his father. Simeon Lee is an old troublemaker. He likes to stir the pot. He likes to start shit.
He likes drama for drama's sake.
Yeah, he gets joy out of causing drama.
Which we discover That is the reason why he invited his entire family there, was to cause drama.
Yeah, and you see this immediately when Harry arrives because he did not tell Lydia that Harry was coming.
No, he knew Harry was coming.
He told her that David was coming, but he knew Harry was coming and did not tell Lydia, and so Lydia is trying to make up another room. She's frantic. Lydia also has only just now found out that Pilar is coming.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of this, like, as people get into the house and arrive, and we've got everyone there.
We've already got all this tension, and it culminates in the conversation that Simeon Lee has with his family on Christmas Eve.
On Christmas Eve. He has the butler come into his room and get him all set up and says...
He fakes a phone call to his lawyer even about changing the will to make sure they hear it.
Yeah, he says to his butler before he sends his butler down to bring the family up, make some noise when you reach the top of the stairs so that I will know that you're coming, so that I can hear you coming. Yes. And when he does that, then he gets on the phone with his lawyer and says, after Boxing Day, I would like to come meet with you and change up the will. Which could mean several different things. Specifically, Harry is thought to not be in the will at all.
Yes.
Because of his behavior over the past years. Pilar is brand new, and Simeon has taken quite a fondness to her.
Yes.
So there's thoughts that both Harry and Pilar will be added into the will, which also means that George, David, and Albert could be losing out on things. And then Simeon tells George that he's going to decrease his allowance.
Yes.
Which this is a baffling thing to me about this man. He is, instead of his family having their own money, he keeps all of his money and gives allowances to his grown children.
It's a way to control and manipulate your family.
So they still are dependent upon him for money as adults.
Which is... Simeon Lee is not a good person.
So Simeon makes a comment about how he's going to decrease George's allowance, which upsets him. And then he says that maybe your wife shouldn't buy so many pretty dresses.
Maybe she should start making her own clothes, which everyone's like, that is ancient mentality.
Not only that, but he also mentions a naval officer that Magdalene lived with before she was married to George, who was old enough to be mistaken for her father, but of course he was not.
No.
And at that time, that sort of behavior was particularly frowned upon, especially for women.
That was scandalous, yes.
And so she takes that very poorly. Then he insults his dead wife, which upsets David terribly. Yes. So he's basically brought everyone into the room, riled them all up, and sends them on their way. Says, I'm not coming down for dinner tonight. I want to be prepared for Christmas tomorrow. So this is the last I'll see of any of you. Get out.
And so they all leave except for Hilda, David's wife. And Hilda tells him, she's like, I believed you when you said you wanted your family around you for Christmas, but now I can just see you're nothing more than a terrible, terrible old man. And I'm really sorry we have come, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Which, of course, has no effect on him.
No.
But she does tell him what she thinks, and they go back downstairs.
But, that's me as a wife. If somebody upset my husband like that, there would be,
Yeah. So, after they go back downstairs, the superintendent, Superintendent Sugden stops by. He is a local police officer.
Yes.
And he shows up at the door, which makes Horbury very nervous whenever Tressilian tells him this.
He's collecting for charity.
He's collecting money for the police's charity. And once Horbury hears he's there just for the charity, he settles down. But Tressilian does note his reaction.
Yes, he breaks a teacup.
And he thinks it's kind of odd. But Tressilian sends Sugden up to the old man's room because whatever else Simeon Lee is, he's always been very generous.
Yes.
And so he sends him up to the old man's room to get his collection for the policeman's charity. And then Sugden leaves. And about an hour after Sugden leaves, there is a thump of furniture being knocked over. There is a blood-curdling animalistic scream.
Inhuman or
without a soul.
Yeah.
There's a scream, and everyone comes rushing from different parts of the house up to the bedroom door of Simeon Lee.
And the door is locked from the inside.
And Harry and Stephen have to knock down the door.
Oh, and Stephen Farr has shown up.
Oh, we forgot
about Stephen Farr.
So Stephen Farr shows up. Turns out he is actually the son of a Mr. Farr who
was a business partner.
Was in business with Simeon.
Of Simeon Lee back when they were in South Africa with the diamond mines.
And so when he had seen the name on Pilar's suitcase where she was going, he decided to swing by, and Simeon Lee invited him to stay for Christmas.
Because his dad was always like, oh, look him up if you're ever in England.
Mm-hmm. So Simeon Lee, so he's invited Stephen. So Stephen, who is a big man like Harry,
yes,
the two of them are able to bust down the door, and they find a rather grisly scene.
Yes.
Which is Simeon Lee sprawled dead on the carpet in front of the fireplace.
Yes.
The roaring fireplace.
Throat
cut, blood everywhere, furniture knocked about as though there was a tremendous struggle.
It definitely was a crime of passion.
And Lydia Lee quotes Macbeth.
Yes.
She says, who would have thought the old man had so much blood in him? And
what does David quote?
David quotes... Oh, it's the Bible.
Yeah.
David quotes, the gears of the mill turn slowly. The gears of the mills of justice turn slowly, which is to say that everyone gets their comeuppance in the end.
Yes.
Which is kind of a chilling thing to say when your father's dead on the floor in front of you, even if he is a terrible person. So
if you hate your father.
So, everyone is in a panic, and Tressilian is sent to call the police.
Yes.
And as he's going down the stairs to call the police, there's a knock on the door.
Sugden.
And Sugden appears.
On the door.
He says that Simeon Lee had alternate reasons for having him.
Yes.
And he said he's back to talk to Mr. Lee, and
because some of the
Tressilian's
diamonds...
like, actually, he's dead now.
Yes. Sugden reveals that he had been called by Simeon Lee earlier in the evening because somebody had taken the uncut diamonds out of his safe.
So Simeon Lee kept a large pile of uncut diamonds. They looked just like pebbles in his safe. And these diamonds were worth 10,000 pounds.
Yes.
He showed them to Pilar earlier in the evening and let her run her hands for them. He said that he liked to feel them. It made him remember the old days. It was kind of a sentimental thing for him. And so he is called Sugden. The first time Sugden arrived, he had called him and said, I think someone stole my diamonds. However, I think I have two suspects. One person, it is a legitimate theft. The other, it is a ill-advised prank. So I'm going to interview both of those people, tell them I've spoken to the police, and get the truth. And then when you come back in an hour, either you can arrest the person responsible or we can know that it's not to be worried about. So Sugden has come back an hour later, only to find that the man who he had spoken to before is dead, which has made this a very convoluted situation.
I just did a quick calculation. Actually, the internet just did a quick calculation.
Oh, yeah?
$10,000 back when this, or 10,000 pounds back when this book was written is now $185,000. So it's not an insignificant sum.
No, it's almost 200,000 pounds.
Yeah.
So there's 200,000 pounds worth of diamonds missing.
Yes.
Simeon Lee is dead.
Yes.
All of his family is there. And
the door was locked from the inside.
So we have the starts of a good murder mystery here. And as Sugden comes in, he sees Pilar pick up something off the floor in the room.
And it's a bit of rubber and a wooden stick.
And he takes it away from her. He's like, this is a crime scene. Don't disturb anything.
So he calls...
Sugden calls Colonel...
my brain wants to say Fitzwilliam, but that's wrong. That's Pride and Prejudice. He calls Colonel Johnson.
Colonel Johnson. Now, Colonel Johnson...
There's always a Johnson in a murder mystery, isn't there?
Colonel Johnson is the head of the police in the area.
Yes, and he is entertaining...
He's the chief constable, and he's entertaining Hercule Poirot.
Yes.
The famous Belgian detective for the holidays.
Yes.
And he and Poirot are actually sitting around having a glass of wine and talking about how nice it is to have a break from all the murder.
Yes, and the colonel is like, there's nothing to beat a roaring fire, and Hercule Poirot is sitting there contemplating the wonderfulness that is central heating.
Well, they have a very funny conversation that I quite enjoyed, where Colonel Johnson says the holidays are wonderful because everyone's all about peace and goodwill, and the crime rates are lower, and there's not as much happening. And Poirot says, that's an interesting thing to say. I would think that putting people who only see each other once a year out of obligation all together in one house for an extended weekend and the tensions are high could cause more crime. And they kind of have this conversation about it. And as soon as the conversation ends, the phone rings. Yes. And it's Sugden calling Colonel Johnson. We've had a murder.
There's been a terrible murder.
Not only has there been a terrible, violent murder, it is of one of the most prolific and wealthy people in the community. And so Colonel Johnson...
I think they've actually done studies where they say, like, the crime rate does go up around the holidays because money's tighter. It's
crime rates go up, but suicide rates do not. There's a common misconception that suicide is higher during the holidays, but it's actually not. But crime is definitely
a lot higher around the holiday season.
So Colonel Johnson he gets off the phone. And he's like, "I'm afraid I have to eat my words. There's been a murder."
There's been a murder.
And he's like, just as a professional courtesy, would you like to come with me? Of course, it's my investigation, and like you'll take a back seat to me, but you can come if you want to.
And Poirot's like, oh well, I might as well.
Poirot is one of my favorite literary detectives.
Me too.
All
He's like, well, I'm here, I might as well.
Well, he's Belgian.
Yes.
Which is the first funny thing, because all of the murders, more or less, take place in England.
Yes.
Or with English people.
And he's described as a funny little man with a mustache.
Yeah, he's a funny little man with a mustache. He's kind of irreverent.
Yes.
And unlike the British and their stiff upper lip, this is a commentary. Agatha Christie, in every single one of her novels, comments about how the British are all keep calm and carry on. You know, that's kind of and especially during World War II, that was the big mantra.
And like the foreign countries, like the Spanish blood, the Italian blood.
Oh yeah, they're like the Spanish.
Hot-headed.
The Spanish are violent, you know.
Yes.
And the Belgians and the French are overly romantic and sentimental.
If it's done with a knife, it's a Spaniard or an Italian or something.
Yeah, like there's a lot of that, and so choosing to write Poirot as a Belgian character. Whenever most of the characters that he is going to interact with and the crimes he is going to solve are within the English countryside is just. It's just a fantastic
It's perfection,
choice.
Because then it allows her to make commentary about the English as an outsider.
Exactly. Even though she's
all of
English.
her books. Well, yeah, even though she's English, so who better to criticize the English way of life than an English woman? So,
Colonel Johnson and Poirot are on the scene. They meet with Superintendent Sugden, and Sugden tells them what's gone down. Poirot looks at the room, and his first comment is, there's so much
blood.
Well, not so much the blood. There is so much blood, but specifically there's so much chaos in the room. Exactly. Like, it looks like there was a tremendous struggle. He turns to Sugden. Yes, like, you, for example, are a very, very strong man. Simeon Lee was an 80-something-year-old invalid. If you were to try and kill him, you could overpower him very easily. There wouldn't have been a struggle.
There's no reason for there to be this much debris.
Yeah, there's no reason for this to be, unless the person who killed Simeon Lee was a much weaker person. Yes. Because, like, you know, you or, like, Harry or Stephen.
Which would indicate a weaker man or a woman.
Right. Because we know Sugden is a police superintendent. He's very big and bold and strong. Yes. And similarly, so are Harry Lee and so is Stephen Farr. But, you know, David is kind of a softer man. Magdalene is a young woman. There are definitely. So at first, that's the first thing he notices, and he starts to kind of try and rule people out based on that. And of course, then he starts to rule people out based on the blood, because there's so much blood. This can't be anything but a crime of passion. So it wouldn't make sense for it to be
a family member, somebody who knew him very well.
Right. So on the one hand, it doesn't seem like it should be someone like, say, Pilar or Stephen, who have just met him.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, someone who knows him well and has a grudge against him, like David, is very, he'd faint at the sight of his own blood. You know? So
David's in a little bit of shock.
Yeah, David is in shock. Well, Albert is having a complete and total like, disassociation. Like, because
and Lydia's handling it beautifully.
Albert, I think, is the only one who actually cared for his father.
I think so.
And Lydia's taking care of him. Basically, they're all being secluded in the dining room while Poirot, Johnson, and Sugden bring them in one at a time for questioning. Yes. So through the questioning, they find out several things. They find out Horbury is a criminal. Yes.
Horbury was out.
He's a blackmailer, so he becomes a prime suspect. But then he tells them he was at the movies
with a girl.
This is backed up by Tressilian and by the girl who was with him at the movies,
and the usher who seated them at the movies. And back when they had ushers at movie theaters, can you imagine?
So we learned several things. First off, Horbury is a criminal, but he has an alibi for when Simeon Lee was killed. The diamonds are gone.
Diamonds are gone.
They are certainly gone. Let's see what else. George was going to be losing some of his allowance.
Yes.
I think Simeon Lee, they find out about the argument where Simeon Lee...
George and Magdalene were supposed to be making a phone call at the exact same time, and they were not.
Yeah. So they both claim to have been making a phone call.
So their alibis
Alfred and Alfred and Harry were having a fight in the dining room.
Yes, which was overheard by the staff.
David and Hilda were playing the piano in the parlor. And Stephen and Pilar were dancing in the ballroom. Supposedly. This is what everything was. At the beginning, this is what we get.
Stephen says he and Pilar were dancing in the ballroom, but Pilar does not confirm that story.
Correct. But
they heard the records playing.
Heard the record play. Like, the record player was heard. The piano was heard.
Yes.
Playing Death March.
The Death March.
Which is a bit more.
Which I feel like David's like, it's the death of my soul.
Yeah. So there's a lot of contradicting information, but they also find out about...
And Lydia does not have anybody to back up her.
Lydia was alone in the study.
Yes, gazing out the window.
So...
In a very particular frock.
So, they're trying to establish where everyone was. They're trying to establish who was with who and who has legitimate alibis. They also find out about the conversation that Simeon Lee had with his family, where he insulted Magdalene, where he told George his allowance would go down, where he threatened to disinherit all of them because he may have bastard children out there.
Pilar is the best one. Yeah, he said, Pilar is the best man among you, and if I had sons that were born the wrong side of the blanket.
Yeah, they're probably better than you.
Yeah, and he's like, and I know I probably have a couple.
Yeah, because he was a famous womanizer when he was a young man. So he said all these hurtful...
Which is not exactly something to brag about. You have 4 sons.
Well, he's a dick, so...
Yeah.
So, they're finding out all about all of this, and Poirot is mainly taking a back seat on the questioning at first.
Yes, until
kind of letting
Alfred begs him to find out who did this.
Alfred basically says that he will pay... he recognizes Poirot. He says, you're that famous detective. You solved that one crime that was in the newspaper recently. You have to find my father's murderer. And Poirot starts to take a more active lead in the investigation.
He stays with the family.
He decides to stay with the family. And during this process, he finds out from Pilar about the rubber and the peg.
Yes.
He also finds out from Lydia.
Which Sugden did not mention to...
No, Sugden had not mentioned it to him at all. But whenever he asks Sugden about it, Sugden immediately gives over the rubber and the peg.
I think it's a bit of shaving kit, but it's really just like a little piece of rubber.
Yeah, it's a little flat piece of rubber shaped kind of like a triangle.
Yeah. And there was one slightly open window in the room, but it had like a burglar
screw. Yeah.
So that way the window could not go up very far.
So the room, it's a traditional locked door mystery.
Yeah. There's like a 2-inch gap in the window.
Yeah, it's a traditional locked door mystery. Like, no one was in the room with Simeon. The room was searched. There was no way for someone to leave the room without being seen, and the door was locked from the inside. So... they deduce that someone used a pair of pliers through the keyhole to turn the key in the lock from outside of the room, which also means that they must not have had very much time at all because the scream happened. They would have had to get
away before...
Well, the scream happened.
Yes.
And then immediately everyone rushed from other parts of the house to the door.
Exactly.
Everyone was outside that door. So either they managed to commit this murder without getting any of this massive quantity of blood on themselves, and they just stayed close to the door.
Yes.
Or they somehow locked the door, went and cleaned up, and came back in the space of like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's very perplexing. And so as he's staying at the house, Poirot finds out about the rubber and the peg. He finds out from Lydia some things about people's opinions of Simeon Lee.
Yes.
He finds out from Hilda that she thinks her husband could be capable of this, but if he were, she would protect him from it.
Yeah.
And from Magdalene, he finds out more details of the insults that Simeon had thrown at basically every member of his family.
Magdalene thinks it's Pilar.
She's like, I don't know her. I don't like her.
She's foreign.
And Pilar is very unsettling throughout this whole process.
Yes.
She kind of seems almost excited by it. She tells them that when she was coming whenever she was brought, a chauffeur was to take her to the train station, a bomb fell on their car and killed the chauffeur.
Yes.
And there was blood everywhere, and she had to walk the rest of the way to the station. And she says this in such a way that's very casual and nonchalant, and everyone's kind of unnerved by that.
Well, that's the thing is, like, people don't understand is that, like, Pilar is being raised in a war zone. It's like she sees horrible atrocities every single day, and she has to get on with her life.
Yes.
And that's not something that keep calm and carry on is used to.
Exactly.
We also find out about the little gardens that Lydia makes. And there was one she was working on that was supposed to look like the Dead Sea.
Yes. Yes, so she was making these little gardens. They're almost like
Terrariums?
Terrariums, yeah. And like, so she had like a rainforest one, and she had one that looked like, you know, the Sahara Desert. And she was making the one that looked like the Dead Sea with lots of pebbles. And Poirot discovers that the diamonds have been dumped into this Dead Sea terrarium.
Yes.
So Poirot finds the diamonds. And
yes, in the
he
Dead
says,
Sea terrarium.
This could mean that Lydia stole the diamonds, but more likely it means that the whoever stole the diamonds found this to be a good hiding place for them at the time. So it does not really help in the investigation so much.
But this terrarium is also conveniently located underneath the window to the bedroom.
Yes, it is. It is almost directly below the window to Simeon's bedroom. So Poirot starts to formulate some theories. He has Colonel Johnson wire to South Africa.
Yes.
And the wire comes back and confirms that Stephen Lee died 2 years ago. Or, excuse me, Stephen Farr. Stephen Farr died 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
And when confronted with this information, Stephen Farr confesses that he is not, in fact, Stephen Farr. He is named Stephen Grant.
Yes.
And that he
is the son of Simeon Lee.
Is one of Simeon Lee's bastard children. He was born to a woman from about 5 years after his final trip to South Africa.
Well, not 5 years, but
5 years. 5 years previous.
Yes, to his final trip to
South Africa. Final trip, he had been with this woman, and she had gotten pregnant, and so he had come to meet his father.
Yes,
and he says, I didn't want to do anything to him. I didn't want to hurt him. I just didn't know how he would react to me, so I told him I was Stephen Farr, because I did know Stephen Farr, and I figured that would be a better way to get a good reception in the house.
Because Horbury, the butler, the one... Tresselin, who answers the door, he's slightly nearsighted, and so he's like, he had mentioned to Poirot that he's like, I'm getting a lot of weird deja vu.
And so Poirot says, of course, you answer the door to Harry Lee, and then a few hours later answer the door to Stephen Farr. It feels like the same thing is happening again.
And they look very similar.
They look very similar. They're both bigger men, strong, and good looking.
Similar coloring.
And so...
They both have blue eyes.
So he starts to piece this together. And at some point during this time, Pilar and Stephen have been very flirtatious with each other from the very beginning. And they...
Which Harry has been really super freaking creepy and saying like, oh, if Pilar wasn't my niece. That's pervy. Yeah. So pervy.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy. So Stephen and Pilar have been very flirty with each other, and they end up going into the pantry and they find this bag of balloons.
Yes.
And they blow up the balloons and are kind of bouncing them around.
Because it was all supposed to be ready for Christmas, and they kind of missed Christmas because of this whole murder situation.
The whole murder business. So they're bouncing these balloons around. They decide to take them outside and let them go. Pilar's floats away. Stevens bursts on a nearby, bare branch of a tree.
Yes.
And Pilar comments that it looks just like the rubber that she found in Simeon Lee's bedroom.
Yes.
And as soon as he hears that, Poirot
gets a flutter. He's all excited.
He says, we need to keep an eye on Pilar. She's in danger.
Yes.
And mere minutes later, Pilar is almost murdered.
Yes. Her skirt catches on a nail in the doorway.
She's passing through a doorway. Yeah. And as she's passing through the doorway, when she pushes it open, someone has placed a cannonball on top of the doorway to fall down and crush her when she opens it. But because her skirt catches on a nail, she's pulled back, and by basically a miracle, she survives.
Yes.
So she's very shaken up. She wants to know what's going on.
Yes.
And this is when Poirot...
Because this is after the reading of Simeon Lee's will.
Yes, so they read Simeon's will, and what we find in the will are several things. First
half
off...
of his assets are left to Alfred and Lydia.
And
including
the rest...
the house. And the rest is equally divided between
all of his children.
Remaining children, including Jennifer, who was Pilar's mother.
Who died a year ago.
However, now since Jennifer has died, her share would be split amongst the others. And so...
And Pilar would get nothing.
And this causes a rift in the family because they think it's only right to
Harry
give Pilar
and Lydia
her mother's...
specifically think that Pilar should have her mother's share.
George thinks just let her live here and give her dresses for an allowance, and that'll be fine.
And then we can take the money.
But
he is outvoted.
Yeah, he is outvoted.
And when Lydia tells Pilar this, she is very upset, and that's when she runs from the room.
She doesn't want the money.
That's when she runs from the room and is almost bludgeoned by the cannonball.
Yeah, she doesn't want the money.
And when
She's very
Poirot
upset about
asks her why she doesn't want the money, she confesses that she is not Pilar Estradavados.
No.
She is Conchita Lopez.
Yes.
Who was Pilar's handmaid or assistant.
Yeah.
And who had been riding with her in the car when a bomb hit the car and killed the driver and Pilar. So Conchita survived, and she decided it might be a fun whim.
Yes.
To take Pilar's place and spend the holidays with a rich family.
And Poirot was like, oh, I know, dear. I know you're not who you say you are because your mother was blue-eyed and your father was blue-eyed, and it is physically impossible for two blue-eyed people to have a brown-eyed child.
Yes. Yes, because I believe she says the reason I have blue eyes is because I have Irish heritage, but you should not have blue eyes if you have that Spanish. So Poirot was already aware that she wasn't who she said she was, but this confession shakes everybody else up.
Yes.
Sugden and Colonel Johnson and the rest of the household. But they forgive her pretty readily. The family forgives her pretty readily. Except for Sugden, Superintendent Sugden immediately tries to pin it on her. It's like, okay, why are you here in disguise? Like, this is obviously you're doing. And that's when Poirot takes over and we get our classic, my favorite part of any good murder mystery, but especially Agatha Christie. We get our classic parlor scene.
The parlor with the Velma explanation.
So the parlor scene and the Velma explanation is kind of a spin-off of the parlor scene.
Yes.
Is a scene in every traditional murder mystery where all of the characters who are suspects in the crime are gathered into a room by the detective, who then walks through the facts of the crime and the details of the crime, and then explains one by one how it could only be one person.
And slowly eliminating people
as they go. So, this is what happens now. Poirot does this. He says, well, we know that... What do we know? We know that the amount of time it would have taken to lock the door and get away and clean up was too much. So I suggest that Simeon Lee was killed earlier in the evening.
Yes.
None of you had seen him since about lunchtime, about noon. And I say that he was killed not at 9 p.m., but at 7 p.m.
Yes, because the fire was also roaring, the room was warm. It, kept the body from getting cold, so it changed the estimated time of death.
Yes. So, he says what happened was someone came into the room, killed Simeon Lee, left the room, and set it up in such a way that you would hear the falling of furniture and a cry 2 hours later.
Yes.
So, who could have done this? Well, we know it wasn't these people because we know it was not Alfred and Harry because they were arguing in the dining room. We know it wasn't George because he was on the telephone. We know it wasn't Magdalena because she was hiding
in an
alcove
to call somebody
because she wanted to call a boy that she was seeing, but her husband was on the phone, so she had ducked into the alcove. We know it was not Pilar because she was in fact hiding in an alcove up next to the bedroom door.
Yes, and Pilar was the only person who saw somebody come out of that bedroom, but she couldn't tell who it was.
Well, she could, but she lied about it. It was Hilda.
Yeah.
But Hilda hadn't come out of the bedroom. Hilda was the first one to the door after the scream. Pilar was mistaken by the killer as a third statue. There were two pale white statues on that wall.
Yes.
And she was standing in between them in a white dress, was mistaken for another statue. So, if it wasn't Pilar and it wasn't Lydia and it wasn't Alfred, it wasn't Harry, it wasn't David, and he just goes through the list.
Yeah.
And he's like, but I thought it was a family member. Sugden says, I thought you said that a family member killed.
And he's like,
Simeon
oh,
Lee.
it was. The
It
amount
was.
of blood, we go back to the character of Simeon Lee. He was violent, but he was also patient. There was one time he waited 15 years to get revenge on a rival. So we would assume that what Simeon Lee left behind, not only money, but also habits, like the stroking of the chin, and habits like being patient to get your revenge on someone.
And then he reveals that there was another bastard child in attendance at the house tonight. And that was Superintendent Sugden.
Yes!
Turns out that Simeon Lee had had an affair with a local lady years past and then had abandoned her and paid her money so that she would not say anything about it and left her and gone back to his family.
Yes.
And Sugden hated that.
Yes.
And plotted his revenge for years and years. And
The
what he had done was he came to the house the first time, quote unquote, collecting money for the policeman's charity.
Yes.
Went upstairs and very easily, as a
had
big
this
man.
bogus story about diamonds.
Yes. As a big man, he was very easily able to overcome Simeon Lee and slit his throat quietly without anyone being aware it had happened.
Yes, and then he stacked up furniture and debris.
He threw the diamonds out the window.
Yeah, threw the diamonds out the window.
Stacked up all the furniture and wrapped fishing line around it.
Yeah.
And dragged it down through the window. And then the coup de grace was the balloon.
Yeah.
That he used to, once it was popped, it would kind of create that screeching noise. That soulless noise. Because it did not come from something with a soul. It came from a balloon.
Yeah.
And then he left that room, locked the door behind him from the outside using pliers, and left the house.
Yeah.
And for 2 more hours, everyone went about their business. And then he came back, went around to the wire, which he had pushed down through the hole in the window, the crack in the window, yanked the wire. The furniture came tumbling down. The balloon popped and screamed. And they busted down the door to find Simeon Lee dead. They thought he had only just died, but he had been dead for several hours already.
Yes.
And the only way they couldn't tell was because the fire had been stoked up. And Tressilian had said that he hadn't done that. So Poirot was able to solve the crime based off of this information.
Yes.
Which is pretty wild. And the book ends with David gaining some peace. He's forgiven his father now that he's dead. Alfred and Lydia are going to sell the house.
Yeah.
And move
Too many
somewhere
bad
else.
memories. They're going to sell the house.
And then
keep their inheritance, move somewhere else.
Conchita and Stephen are going to go back to South Africa and get married.
Yes.
And Lydia says, we'll invite you back for a proper Christmas next
proper
year.
English Christmas.
And that's how the book ends. It's
yeah, and Hercule Poirot is back where he starts, wishing for central heating.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I will say this is the very first Agatha Christie story that I figured out before the end. I was very proud of myself. I got it.
Oh, yeah?
I knew who it was before the end.
When did you figure it out?
The mustache.
Mm.
As soon as he came back with the false... He went to
Yes.
town and bought the false mustache. I'm like, it's
Poirot.
Sugden!
Poirot, at the very beginning of the novel, comments on how luxurious
Yes,
Superintendent
because
Sugden's mustache
Poirot
is.
takes quite pride in his own mustache.
But he thinks that Sugden's is better and more luxurious. And he asks
And he's
how
like, what
Sugden
do you
takes
do?
care of it.
And he's like, it just sprouts out of my face. I'm like, as a female, that's not a good answer.
Yeah, so he just is kind of jealous of that mustache and notes at the very beginning.
Like, you have luxurious hair and it just sprouts out of your noggin like that.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how much crap I have to put in my hair.
But then later on in the novel, he asks when he is staying there to have the portrait of the young Simeon Lee put into his room. And then he goes out and buys a false mustache and puts it on the portrait, which is hilarious.
Yes.
Like I just have this picture of Hercule Poirot, who is like the world's greatest detective, who already thinks he knows what happened, but just to confirm, I'm going to put a fake mustache on this painting of this old man and see if it looks like the local police chief.
Yeah.
It's very, very funny.
Because I knew about Pilar not being who she said she was when it said something about, like, her mother had blue eyes and then they saw the portrait of her father who also had blue eyes. I'm like, but Pilar has brown eyes. That's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not common knowledge, like, back in the 30s because genetics was just starting to become a thing.
Well, Mendelssohn's, not Mendelssohn's,
That's a classical composer.
Is it Mendel? Yeah, but the actual genetics, Punnett squares.
Yes.
Like the basics of Punnett squares, that already existed. And Johann, what's his face, who did the pea shoots experiment, that had been some 50 years previously.
I'm like, I remember learning that in biology class in freshman year.
So Poirot was aware of that information. So yeah, it was pretty easy to deduce that Pilar was not who she said she was. Less easy to say Stephen Farr. Really, with that one, it was more of a like, what are the odds that you would just happen to be traveling to the same town that this man lives in without knowing he lives there, and then when finding out.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So, between, like, the comment about, like, he had a comment where it's like there was a chief, he was Simeon Lee was talking to Pilar, and he said something about there was a tribal man who had, like, an army of all of his sons, and they were all around the same age, and they were his protection detail, and he's like, I bet there's quite a few of those out there for me, so I'm like, yeah, I bet Sugden's his son.
There was a lot of indication that...
And, like, even Sugden's story didn't really seem to hold a lot of weight with me.
Yeah.
Like, the whole, I called somebody, I called a police officer because my diamonds were stolen, and I think it's one of two people, come back in 30
Why
minutes.
wouldn't he call the police
Exactly.
and say, here are the two people I think stole the diamonds, interrogate them yourself?
Yeah,
like,
and I'm like, if he was going to call the police, they never said anything about there being a phone in his room. This is back when the phone had its own room, and it was downstairs, and he never went downstairs to use the phone.
Right. And between that and the information from Tresillian that the fire had not been stoked that night.
Yes. That was a big clue.
Those were the big clues. And the window, even though the window was not an escape route because it was cracked open.
Yeah.
Even though it had the burglar screw on it, if it had not been cracked open, then Sugden would not have been able to throw out the diamonds or to lead the wire through it so that he could cause the crash later. And that way he was attempting to pin the crime on...
Yeah, and again, there was so much blood, but there wasn't any, like, footprints left or splatter, or no one was covered in it, so, it made you kind of think it's like the person who committed this crime was not in that room for very long.
Yeah. So, it's a pretty good one. I really liked it.
It's a good one.
I love old murder mysteries, and this one has just like every single theme. So you've got the big old house in the countryside, and no one can leave the house until we solve this crime.
The only thing it's missing is secret passageways.
Yeah, but I mean, there's still elements of that, with Magdalena hiding in the alcove, and like Pilar being mistaken for a statue in her white dress in the hallway.
Yeah. Mistaken identities. Secret identities,
people,
family secrets, money. There's money to be had. There's jewel theft. There's family drama. This just has like every murder mystery trope, just about. I mean,
Agatha Christie is the one who invented most of those tropes. That's not surprising. I actually saw Knives Out recently.
Mm-hmm. It's on my list.
With my fiance.
Fantastic.
So in Knives Out. Obviously, no spoilers. This is a new movie. But Christopher Plummer plays a rich old murder mystery writer who, at the night of his 85th birthday party, is found dead with his throat slit. And the house was full of people from his family. So there was his son and his daughter and their spouses. And then there was his grandson, who is like a neo-Nazi, because this one was actually set in 2019. So that was kind of wild. And then there was a grandson who had stormed out because he had had an argument with him in the study early in the evening. And then there was his maid, and then there was also his nurse, and she was an absolute delight of a character. And then Daniel Craig comes in to help the local police department as this big Southern detective. It was just like not only did I see the parallels to Agatha Christie in general, like after reading this book, I was like, the parallels to this specific Poirot novel were really, really striking.
Yeah, and we don't get a lot of whodunits in the modern era.
No, unfortunately. That's why I was so excited about the movie Knives Out, because it was, it's been a long time since we've had a good whodunit. I mean, Clue in the 80s
was the last one.
Become kind of a cult classic, but there's not been a huge number of, like, traditional murder mystery whodunits in the time since.
Yeah, and I love them.
It's one of my favorite genres. I'm hoping that Knives Out will see a resurgence of popularity in the genre.
I hope so.
Luckily, it has stayed pretty consistent within literature.
It'd be nice to get some original content back in the cinema.
Yeah.
Something that's not owned by Disney or Marvel.
It's been pretty consistently available in literature, though.
Yes.
Between Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie, and then modern types, you've got your John Pattersons, you've got your Robert B. Parkers.
Yes.
It's a very, very popular genre, and with good reason. It's a lot of fun. And
it is. It's a lot of fun.
It requires you to think.
And hopefully we're going to see a lot of resurgence of, like, whodunits, because true crime is becoming more and more popular right now.
Well, and I think, again, we have, we both work for a murder mystery company.
Yeah.
Murder mystery parties are wildly
We're
popular.
busier
Escape
than ever.
rooms are wildly popular.
We're busier than ever. I mean, we really are.
So, yeah, it's one of my favorite genres. I love Agatha Christie. I especially love her Poirot novels because I love
Poirot.
I love Hercule Poirot. He's a very fun character, slipping in between French and English and making all these funny comments to people.
And then there's Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah, Kenneth Branagh was Poirot in the most recent iteration of Murder on the Orient Express.
God, that was a good movie.
It was a lot of fun. That was what, last year? The year before?
And it was shot so beautifully.
Yeah, it was really good. So how many bottles would you give Hercule Poirot's Christmas? Or A Christmas for Murder?
I think I'd give it 4. It's a quick read. It's fun. It's a good frolicking murdery romp.
Yeah, I'd say.
This is the second time I've read it.
Give it
I love
4 as well. This is the first time I've read this one. Just because it was a Christmas themed one and I was like, I don't need a Christmas special. But all that really is Christmas about it is that it takes place at the holidays.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'd give it 4 solid bottles, which means it's a pretty damn good book.
Yeah.
Go check it out. Check out the other Hercule Poirot novels and anything else Agatha Christie's written, because
Please
it's all
do.
Great. Most of it's available on Project Gutenberg if you're looking.
There's even an Agatha Christie Doctor Who episode.
Yes, there is.
The Wasp and the Unicorn. And it has David Tennant.
So yeah, enjoy that. Try not to kill your family over the holidays. We've got one more episode coming up this holiday season.
Yes.
Our last episode of the year will be on the last day of the year.
Remember, make sure your wine glass stays full and prison orange is not your color.
So we have one more book coming out to you this year. We're going to read Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. That will come out at the end of the month.
New Year's Eve.
So in the meantime, have a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, whatever it is you celebrate, joyous solstice.
Happy Saturnalia.
Yeah, all that jazz.
Yeah.
And follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Check out our Patreon and our website, litliterature.com. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. For more information, visit us at litliteraturepodcast.com or check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. And remember, too much work and no vacation deserves at least a small libation. Cheers!